Team building is a very tricky variable in Pokemon VGC, and it is something that a lot of people struggle with versus just playing the game. And I want to talk about how I go about team building in Scarlet and Violet and how I get to the point where I feel my team is comfortable enough to actually play. So this has been a requested video for a while now here on the channel, how I go about team building in the current formats, how I just team build in general in competitive Pokemon. And even though I did have a video recently that talked about this exact thing, I figured I'd make an update video because it's something that is just so requested. And I do think the original video is still good. You guys can go back and check on that and watch that one as well. And there may be some tips and tricks in there that I didn't necessarily cover in this one, but I did want to add on. I just rewatched that video to kind of make this one, and I wanted to talk about what else you could do as far as team building goes, and a lot of things that I've seen people do as far as team building goes that could be tweaked and adjusted. So just for conversation's sake, I have up the team that I took with me to Indianapolis regionals, and I wanted to kind of talk about how I got here with this particular team. As you can see, this team is very basic. It's very standard to what a lot of people were running at the start of Regulation G, and that is fine. I feel like a lot of people feel that you have to have a lot of spice when you go into team building, and you got to kind of try and find something off meta, and that is not necessarily the case. You just need to find a team, one, that you're comfortable with and you feel okay with the playstyle of, and then you also just need to figure out what exactly you're trying to do. Are you a Trick Room team? Are you a Balance team? Are you a Tailwind team? And figure out which of those options is best case for you, and then build around that. And this team actually went through a handful of different variations along the way before I ended up getting to the team that I took with me to Indianapolis. But before we get into the actual team building process, I want to talk about the fact that a lot of people get held up on EVs, and I think that's a very interesting thing. I feel like a lot of newer players feel kind of off-put by just grabbing an EV spread from somebody else. However, that is totally okay. There is nothing wrong with stealing a team idea or stealing EV spreads and saying this works and I'm going to use it for that reason. There's a reason that other players and top players are using certain spreads, and when they share those spreads, there is no reason you should not grab them and try them out because they may just be beneficial. There's no rule against taking spreads from other players, especially if they're sharing them to the public. And I know Wolfie's very popular about putting out on his Patreon the EV spreads for teams that he's done very well with. There is nothing wrong with taking those EV spreads and applying them to Pokemon, even if they are on a different version of that team. So that is just something that you need to know. Do not be afraid of snagging ideas from other players. That I feel like a lot of new players are very kind of stuck in that mindset where it's like, I want to be original, I want to do my thing, but the top players are playing these Pokemon the way they are for a very particular reason, and that is why they are having success with it. And if you vary from that too much, you can kind of get off course and not have the same success with that particular Pokemon. So don't get held up on, I'm taking somebody's EV spread. If you're not good at EV spreads, I know I'm not in particular good at EV spreads, steal them. Take them from somebody else. Lab Mounts is great as well because Lab Mounts is going to show you the top teams in the format and allow you to look at what the spreads are, what the moves are, if the spreads are available, what the spreads are, but what the move sets are and how these Pokemon are being played together to kind of give you an idea of how to team build, how to build certain spreads out and things like that. So again, don't be afraid of snagging ideas from other players. This is going to help you in your team building process. Now, I think a lot of people get held up on the idea of where to start with team building. And for me, it's looking at what Pokemon in particular you want to use and how that Pokemon actually benefits the team, how it does something different than another Pokemon that may just be better for that particular team, right? So let's say, for example, we are going to run a Kyogre team. Kyogre. Very good Pokemon right now, really strong with Water Spout and things of that nature, right? We want to run a Kyogre team. What's Kyogre do? Well, Kyogre runs Drizzle. It's going to do massive damage in the rain. It's not a particularly fast Pokemon though, so having access to Tailwind could be something that really benefits us. So then we think about what the Pokemon are in the format that are going to provide that kind of benefit for Kyogre, right? So thinking of the top Tailwind Pokemon, I immediately think of Pelipper. Pelipper's an interesting one. Pelipper's really good. It also provides Drizzle options, so you have multiple ways of setting the rain. Tornadus is another Pokemon that really benefits this because again, you could set the rain with Prankster, Prankster, Tailwind, Prankster, Rain Dance. You have a lot of options here, and then in the rain, you're also benefiting from having access to Bleak Wind Storm. Very powerful, 100% accurate. Bleak Storm does a lot of damage. You can also run Taunt, just run Protect, whatever the case may be. Then another Pokemon that is seen use, and this is an off-meta pick, right? You can look at the meta stuff, but then also you have to look at other Pokemon that, especially in new formats like Regulation G, where Pokemon maybe previously weren't good but are now seeing use because of the other tools that are available to them. Iron Jugulis is seeing a lot of success on Kyogre teams. And the reason for this is when you look at the flying type stabs that Iron Jugulis has access to, it's really not that great, right? You have Acrobatics, you have Air Slash, you have Dual Wing Beat, and you have Hurricane. And previously, Hurricane didn't feel all that great because typically you were going to have to set your own rain. This thing does get access to Rain Dance. However, with Kyogre next to this, you don't have to set the rain, and you can immediately start clicking Hurricanes, which is very powerful. So this thing, with Tailwind, being that ability to boost the Kyogre speed, set Tailwind with a booster energy, and then have immediate access to Hurricane the subsequent turn is incredibly powerful. The booster energy is going to give you that ability to not only run like Rain Dance on this thing and be able to, you know, set rain if something were to switch in or change the weather on you. You can also have access to Snarl. There are a lot of powerful special attackers in the format. Looking at Calyrex Shadow Rider, looking at Terapagos, looking at Kyogre. There's tons of stuff in the format that does a lot of really good damage in the special attacking side. So this provides a lot of play for Kyogre. So you look at these Pokemon that all do very similar things, right? You're using them as a Tailwind support Pokemon. You're using them to benefit the Kyogre in a special way. And you go, okay, Pelipper's doing very similar things to the Kyogre, and it shares that typing with Kyogre. I really don't need the extra coverage in this regard. So you could just get rid of Pelipper in this, right? You think, I don't need Pelipper. Then you look at these two Pokemon, and you can decide based on the rest of the team what you're doing. And a lot of the time when I think of team building, I think of what Pokemon I want to use, especially if I'm building an off-meta Pokemon like an Iron Jugulis. I look at the two Pokemon that are very similar in that regard, looking at Tornadus and Iron Jugulis, and what do they do differently? Well, Tornadus does Rain Dance, Tailwind, Bleak Storm. I do Tailwind, Hurricane, and Rain Dance on Iron Jugulis. Very similar, just losing the spread damage. So the last move on Tornadus, what else is it really running normally? Protect or Taunt. Does that really benefit me a whole lot when I can run Snarl that kind of shuts down a lot of the other Pokemon in the format, especially after I have a booster speed up and I'm outspeeding so many things. So Iron Jugulis kind of feels really good in this particular scenario. So even though Iron Jugulis previously wasn't an incredibly popular Pokemon, it fills this role so incredibly well on the Kyogre team that it is worth considering as a teammate here and probably worth running. I know this team had a lot of success at Indianapolis. There was a lot of Iron Jugulis Kyogre that were running around in day 2, and that's really powerful. It's something that you have to look at when you go into team building. How am I benefiting the team with this particular Pokemon? Is it better than something else? Is it worth running something else over this? And that can definitely be changed as time develops and as the team continues to develop. Maybe you swap a Pokemon here and there. And now we're going to get into the actual team building side of things, right? So I initially, when I was getting ready for Indy, I was like, okay, I want to run Calyrex Shadow Rider because at the start of the format, it felt like Calyrex Shadow Rider was the GOAT. It was so incredibly powerful. That is the Pokemon that I want to rock and roll with. I was playing a lot of Ice Rider, and then I was like, I'm not doing so hot with this. Maybe let's shift over to something else, and I started having a lot of success with Shadow Rider. So that kind of developed, and so I looked at other teams that people had been building. I looked at other things that people were rocking with, and I went, okay, what is working, what is not? So I saw this Wolf team that he won an online tournament with, and it was Rillaboom, Calyrex Shadow Rider, Incineroar, Clefairy for the After You. If they were set Trick Room, you could After You and still use Astral Barrage very effectively under the Trick Room with Clefairy because Clefairy is incredibly slow. Very cool combination. Then you had Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and Tornadus, and that was kind of my thought process, is like, oh, this is doing very well. And then this is what I kind of developed from there. I said, oh, I really am not digging the Clefairy. It's very niche. Not filling the role that I particularly like. What can I do differently with the team? So I ended up taking off Clefairy and providing a Moongus support. This gives me the option of doing Spore, I think this is just bug because everything has Astral Barrage and Psychic as their first two moves. I think it's bug. Showdown's having issues. I have access to Spore. I'm able to deal with the Trick Room scenarios when I need to with this Pokemon, and I think that's really positive. So I ran with this team for a while and was really enjoying how it played, but it still felt kind of off. And then I ended up with this team, which is funny because it's the team that ended up winning a lot of online tournaments. Joe Ugarte was actually playing this team a fair bit and winning very, very much with this team. So I ended up dropping the Tornadus because I was like, I really don't feel like the Tornadus is providing me enough support, enough benefit to actually get the full use out of it. I think Raging Bolt is just better. It gives me more coverage options, allows me to deal with a lot of threats more effectively, and just kind of be an annoying wall that can set up. So I ended up playing more of a balanced style team because of that. So as my team building process went on, I said, okay, my Pokemon of choice is going to be Calyrex Shadow Rider. I like this Pokemon. It does a lot of damage. And then I'm like, okay, so looking at its defensive stats, it's incredibly frail, especially in a restricted format. This thing is just going to get nuked. It has a 4x weakness. It has a lot of issues with it. So I'm like, what can I do with this Pokemon to maximize what I want to do? Well, Astral Barrage is obviously a given. That's going to be incredibly powerful for this particular Pokemon. We're going to run Astral Barrage. It's a signature move. It gives me the most chance to activate my AS1 to get the Grimnay bonus. But then I'm like, Expanding Force is an option, but it feels bad in a double restricted format, right? If I'm running Expanding Force, I get locked out by anything with Wide Guard with this Pokemon. So I was like, I really don't think I need that for this Pokemon. So I'm like, okay, why not run something like Psychic or Psyshock? And I landed on Psyshock just because it felt good to have that option. A lot of Rillabooms are running Assault Vest, so having the option to hit things with the Assault Vest that did defensive damage rather than special defensive damage was going to be very beneficial. And then I thought, okay, this is incredibly frail. Why don't I just go for a Focus Sash and give myself a guaranteed 2 turns with this Pokemon? That is going to help me out dramatically in my matchups with Shadow Rider. And then I'm like, well, because I have the Sash and because this Pokemon is so fast naturally, I'm able to actually go ahead and click Nasty Plot on this and still have a really solid turn, especially if I have Fake Out users to benefit this. And then finally, I rounded it out with Protect. And this right here gave me so much control of the game. I ran Terra Ghost on mine because I'm like, I can maximize my damage. I have the Focus Sash, so why do I need a defensive Terra typing when I could just do a ton of damage in general? So I ended up landing on Terra Ghost, and it was a very, very powerful option for this Pokemon. And then from here, I was like, okay, what else is going to be good? Obviously, Incineroar is incredibly solid in restricted formats. Fake Out, Parting Shot, all that fun stuff. With Intimidate, very good Pokemon. Fake Out, Parting Shot. Mine ended up running Will-O-Wisp over Flare Blitz, and then I also had Knockoff. So I had control with Incineroar to provide, you know, help for my team in the form of Will-O-Wisp, being able to deal with a lot of things, and be able to dish out a lot of damage with Knockoff into certain Pokemon like opposing Calyrex Shadow Riders, Knockoff Rocky Helms for things like Urshifu if I were to run Urshifu. That's kind of where my head landed, and then I ended up on Terra Ghost simply because of the fact that I'm able to avoid close combats and things of that nature. I'm able to avoid body presses. It was just a really good option for the Incineroar, and I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. And then I'm not running Terra Grass on this, so Safety Goggles feels good. It gives me a lot of play into a lot of Pokemon in the format. And then I'm like, okay, from here, I would like a grass type. Obviously, I ended up on Rillaboom. It's probably one of the best grass types in the format outside of like Ogerpon. And I was like, Rillaboom is really, really good. I gave it a Fire Terra typing. I gave it Fake Out. I gave it Woodhammer. I gave it Grassy Glide. And I gave it U-Turn. So I had the ability to go in and out and in and out with this Pokemon, continue Fake Out spamming with the Incineroar, and provide a lot of pressure on the team with my Fake Out. So I really liked that play with the double Fake Out users. And then from there, I was like, obviously, I want to finish my Fire, Water, Grass car. I'm already 2/3 of the way there. What Pokemon is really good as far as a water type goes? Well, Urshifu Rapid Strike is incredibly good. And mine actually ended up being more defensive than fast. A lot of them are rocking that Choice Scarf, but I actually really liked the Mystic Water on this Pokemon. Mystic Water was incredibly good. Mine was still Terra Water, and it was calced in such a way that it could survive an Astral Barrage from an opposing Calyrex. So it was a very bulky Urshifu, but with the Mystic Water and Terra Water, I was still doing a ton of damage. So it was running pretty standard stuff. We had Aqua Jet, and then we had Detect. Very standard stuff for Urshifu to just do a ton of damage. And then from there, It was, I need a Trick Room coverage option. I need to be able to deal with Trick Room if necessary, and that's when I landed on Amoonguss over that Clefairy. I didn't like the Clefairy because Amoonguss feels good into a lot of matchups, even if they're not the Trick Room matchup, where Clefairy only felt good in the Trick Room matchup, so it just wasn't coming to as many battles. So for me, it was like, okay, I can run Amoonguss and get so much more out of that Pokemon in this slot than having the what's it called, the Clefairy here. So I was able to go, okay, I want Spore, I want Pollen Puff, and then I want to be able to dish out some more damage with this. Not Pollen Puff, excuse me, I had Rage Powder on mine, and I was like, I want to do more damage than just having Pollen Puff. So I had Sludge Bomb as an option to deal some damage, and this actually proved very beneficial for me in the tournament. I was able to actually KO some Pokemon with Amoonguss, which felt really good. So Amoonguss with the Sludge Bomb over the Pollen Puff, I was like, I don't really need to heal. I'm doing a lot of rotating in that. I don't feel like I need the heals. I want to be able to just dish some damage out if necessary, keep Amoonguss on the field, protect something else, and KO a Pokemon. So Sludge Bomb worked out really nicely. And then, like I mentioned, I had Tornadus on this team originally, but Tornadus was like, it was useful in some regards, but Raging Bolt was still popular, and like even if I got the Tailwind up, I wasn't getting a ton of benefit out of Bleak Wind Storm, so it just didn't feel amazing to me having that Tailwind. And I was like, I already have such a balance-oriented team with a lot of rotations with these very bulky Pokemon in the form of Amoonguss and Incineroar. Even my Urshifu was incredibly bulky. I was like, what else can I do to add to this team that's going to give me a benefit in these matches? And I was like, okay, Raging Bolt is really good, because one of the biggest threats to my Calyrex without actually having Tailwind support was going to be Urshifu Choice Scarf. That was going to be a huge problem for my Calyrex, and even if I had Tailwind support, I wasn't able to actually deal with the Urshifu that effectively because of the fact that it still outsped me if it had its own Tailwind. So having something like Raging Bolt with Thunderclap was incredibly beneficial for this team, because I could throw that out and eat the hits of a Surging Strike and then be able to go for a Thunderclap and pressure that Urshifu. And if I knew that the Urshifu was going to swap, I could go for a Calm Mind and start setting this Pokemon up to be a bigger problem for my opponent. I was also running Dragon Pulse and Protect on this thing, and then I had leftovers with the Terra Fairy. And this proved to be a very powerful team in that regard, because of the fact that I looked at what I needed for my Calyrex. I was like, this is a good Pokemon. I want to use this Pokemon. What benefits it? Calyrex doesn't like taking Ghost damage, and Incineroar can swap into that. Calyrex doesn't like taking Dark type damage. Urshifu can switch into that. Amoonguss doesn't like taking psychic damage. Incineroar can swap into that. There's so many things on this team where I can swap in Pokemon to take the damage for other Pokemon while also providing a lot of support for the teammates that it has. I was able to win a lot of sets with this team. I went 4-3 at the tournament, which obviously I didn't make day 2 with, but I felt very good in my play with this team. So that's kind of where your head needs to be. You need to look at the teammates that you're adding and go, okay, how do these teammates benefit the other Pokemon on this team? So going back to that Kyogre example, right? Going back to the Kyogre example, I feel like a lot of people, when they're building teams as well, have issues with thinking that they need to be as spicy as possible. Like a lot of comments that I see on videos that I play are like, oh, you featured X Pokemon in the thumbnail, but of course you won because you surrounded it by other good Pokemon. Like, that's how you play VGC. You want to surround your team with Pokemon that are good to benefit the Pokemon that are maybe more, off meta. That is something that's incredibly crucial. If you're playing with a team of entirely off meta Pokemon that really aren't synergizing as well as some of the more meta stuff could, then you're just kind of cutting off your hands and trying to win a sword fight. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you could have something like an Iron Jugulus that maybe isn't super meta and then pairing it with other popular Pokemon. And Andrew Ding's team at Indianapolis is a perfect example of this, right? You're running that 2 Pokemon that are not particularly meta, right? You have Iron Jugulus and Serena. Both are very good on this particular team. You have Queenly Majesty that blocks priority, so you can't have Grassy Glides flying into your Kyogre. You can't have Fake Outs shutting down your Tailwind. You have a lot of things that are super beneficial. It works the exact same way as Armor Tail and Farigiraf. And it's just good for having access to Triple Axle, Taunt, Power Whip. Very good Pokemon in the format. So it's an off-meta pick, but it fits because of the team that it's on. Same goes for Iron Jugulus. You're rocking Tailwind, Hurricane, Protect, and Snarl. Very good in that regard, being able to dish out a ton of damage and provide support in the form of Snarl and Tailwind. Very good. But if you look at the rest of the team, it's good stuff. It's Pokemon that are already very good. Why? Because these Pokemon, while they are filling a very good role on this team and doing some damage here and there, they're not as necessarily the bread and butter of the format. They're not something that's going to be on every team unanimously. Versus things like Incineroar, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Flutter Mane are all staples of VGC in Scarlet and Violet at this point. And we know that they can dish out tons of damage. And they support those off-meta picks in very powerful ways. Because if you set the Tailwind, you're enabling your Urshifu to outspeed stuff if there's maybe a Calyrex Shadow Rider with Tailwind on the other side. You're allowing that Urshifu to do its job that much more effectively. If you are running Flutter Mane and they have maybe a Sun option, right? You're able to go for Iron Jugulis Tailwind and still be able to outspeed stuff with the Flutter Mane. Very good in that regard. So you're using the meta pieces that are already established in the format to benefit the Pokemon that are maybe less used. And this is more for those special teams that have those off meta picks, because they can be very beneficial in the right circumstance. But again, I get these comments all the time. Oh, you're pairing them with Urshifu Rapid Strike. Of course they're going to win. That's not how it works. You could still lose with Urshifu Rapid Strike. It just, these Pokemon are good and they will amplify the effectiveness of the other Pokemon. For example, you lead Urshifu, right? You lead Urshifu and Iron Jugulis, and they have a Rillaboom and an Incineroar on the other side of the field, right? That's a problem for you. You're going to probably get faked out and wood hammered or something to that effect, right? You're able to then go for a Serena swap in, or say, for example, this was running Flare Blitz, right? You have Urshifu and Incineroar on the field, and you see a Rillaboom and Incineroar on the other side of the field, right? And you're going to get faked out and wood hammered. You can swap in the Serena onto the Urshifu slot, and say, again, this is running Flare Blitz. You can then go for Flare Blitz into the Rillaboom, dish out a ton of damage very early on, or even go for a Will-O-Wisp if it's still running Will-O-Wisp. Go for a Will-O-Wisp onto that Rillaboom, not get faked out, and dish out a ton of damage that turn. Very beneficial start to that battle. You've already mitigated a lot of the threat from the Rillaboom and done a ton of benefit for your team by lowering that. You're now going to take less damage on your Urshifu. You're going to take less damage on your Kyogre if you have it in the back. There's a lot of things that happen there, and then the subsequent turn you have access to Triple Axle to help deal with that, or you have access to rotate again and get something else in, like Kyogre that maybe doesn't want to take a Flare Blitz. So you have so many options with these off meta picks to benefit the picks that are already good. What's another physical water type Pokemon? Let's think. Instead of Urshifu, let's say we were running let's say we were running Azumarill. Let's say we're running this, right? If you're running Serena and Azumarill instead of, you know, Rapid Strike Urshifu and Serena, you're now in a position where you are slower than most of the other Pokemon on the field because you're running Azumarill. And you are having a Pokemon that's just not as good as, you know, other Pokemon. It's good, but it's just a little off. So you have two Pokemon that are outclassed by some other things in the format. And that can cause a lot of problems for you, because what can happen is, you know, let's say there's a Urshifu Rapid Strike on the other side of the field, right? And you have a Azumarill. You're like, I'm going to dish out some damage to their Incineroar, whatever. There's an Urshifu Rapid Strike on the other side of the field. What this could do, because it's just better than a Azumarill in this format, you can just go for a U-turn into the Serena, do a ton of damage, and bring something else in that can deal with these two Pokemon, and these two Pokemon are just not having as good a time, right? So because I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, but I hope this makes sense. That when you pair too many of these off meta picks together, you start to see the cracks in the team building process, because these Pokemon are outclassed by other things. Azumarill's not as good as Urshifu Rapid Strike. Same as like when Palafin was very popular, Azumarill was still good. It was, I would argue, much better in those formats when Palafin was powerful. I would say it was like Palafin light. But because Palafin was so much more powerful, if you got that 0 to hero off and were able to dish out a ton of damage, Azumarill started to feel a lot worse in those matchups. So because these Pokemon are weaker and outclassed by some other things, not necessarily that they're bad, but they just have other Pokemon that fill similar roles and might fill them slightly better. When you pair too many of them together, you start to see the cracks in the team building process. So pairing them with the more meta picks, you can get away with doing some more cheeky stuff with some of these lesser used Pokemon. And I hope that makes sense, and I hope all this really helps with the team building process. But that is going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and sub for more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to check out that original video. I think there's a lot of useful information. That one is called Team Building with Anything, because I talk more specifically about off-meta Pokemon in that video. So check that out if that is something that interests you. I'll link it in the description below. And if you want to check out the Discord, share regulation G teams that'll be featured here on the channel in the future, be sure to do that. But until next time, peace.